The diner on Route 9 smelled like burnt coffee and bacon grease, the kind of place that had been serving truckers and travelers since before the interstate stole its business.
All of us. Let's make every mile count.
Outside, 17 motorcycles sat lined up in the gravel lot like a row of sleeping animals, chrome catching the last orange light of a Tennessee evening. Inside, at the corner booth, sat a man the locals didn't know but somehow already respected. Broad shoulders, gray beard trimmed close. A leather vest with patches that told a story most people wouldn't dare ask about. His name was Caleb Whitfield, though for 30 years, almost nobody had called him that. To the men who rode behind him, he was preacher, a name earned not from any pulpit, but from the way he spoke at funerals no father should ever have to attend. He wasn't thinking about funerals that night. He was thinking about nothing at all, which was rare for him, and rarer still that he was enjoying it. Then the waitress came to refill his coffee. She was maybe 25, dark hair pulled back, a name tag that read Sophia in faded plastic letters. She'd been polite all evening, quick with the coffee, quicker with a smile, the kind of quiet warmth that made grown bikers sit up a little straighter and mind their language. She reached for his empty mug. Her sleeve rode up, and there, on a thin silver chain around her wrist, hung a ring. Preacher's hand shot out, not rough, but fast enough that the whole booth went still. He didn't grab her. He grabbed the moment. His eyes locked on that ring like a man who'd just seen a ghost walk into a diner wearing an apron.
Where'd you
he
get
said,
that?
voice low. Did you get that? Nora blinked, startled, but didn't pull away. Something in his face, not anger, something closer to grief, made her answer honest instead of defensive. It was my mother's, she said. She never takes it off. I just borrow it sometimes. For luck. Preacher's jaw tightened. His eyes hadn't left the ring, a simple silver band, engraved on the inside with two words nobody outside one small, tight Brotherhood should have ever known. Sir? Nora asked, uncertain now. Sir, my mother has a ring like yours. She nodded toward his hand. And there it was, on his own ring finger, worn thin with 3 decades of wear, engraved with the exact same phrase. Vow eternal. The whole diner seemed to hold its breath. 16 bikers at the counter went quiet. The cook stopped scraping the grill, and Caleb Preacher Whitfield, a man who had buried brothers, broken laws he disagreed with, and never once flinched in front of danger, sat frozen in a diner booth like the floor had opened beneath him. Because he knew exactly whose ring that was, and he knew exactly why he hadn't seen it, or the woman who wore its match, in 28 years. To understand why a grown man froze over a piece of jewelry, you have to go back. Not months. Decades. The year was 1998. The club wasn't called the Vow Riders yet. It didn't even have a proper clubhouse, just a rented garage on the edge of a steel town that was dying slower than everyone wanted to admit. Back then it was 5 guys who'd grown up 2 streets apart, riding beat-up bikes because cars cost money none of them had. Caleb Whitfield was 24. Loud, quick to laugh, quicker to fight if someone from a rival crew looked at his friends wrong. He wasn't preacher yet. That name hadn't been earned. His best friend, closer than a brother, closer than blood, was a wiry mechanic named Samuel Turner. Everyone called him Doc, not because he had any medical training, but because he could fix anything with an engine and half the neighborhood's broken hearts besides. Doc was the one who kept the group from falling apart during the hard years. He was the one who insisted, even when the others wanted to just be a gang of guys who rode together, that they should be something more. A club with a code. A family that showed up, for funerals, for rent money, for kids who needed a ride to school when a parent couldn't. We're not outlaws, Doc used to say. We're the guys people call when the outlaws are the problem. It was Doc's idea, actually, to have the rings made. 5 of them, identical, engraved with 2 words that would become the whole philosophy of the club they were building. Vow eternal. Not a vow to crime. Not a vow to violence. A vow to each other, and to whoever needed protecting. Doc gave the 6th ring, smaller, a woman's size, to his wife Grace the week they married. She wore it on a chain most days because it was a size too big, tightened by a jeweler with more heart than skill. It never left her. 2 years later, Grace was pregnant with their first child. 3 months after that, Doc was dead. The story the club told for years afterward was simple, almost too simple for what it cost. A rival crew, not a fictional stand-in for any real organization, just 5 angry young men who thought muscle solved everything, had been leaning on a widow 2 streets from the garage, trying to force her out of a house they wanted for a chop shop location. Doc heard about it. Doc, who fixed things, who believed a club without a code was just a gang, went to talk sense into them. Caleb wasn't there. That was the detail that ate at him for 28 years. He'd been at the hospital that night. His mother was sick, and Doc had told him not to worry, told him he'd handle it alone, told him it was just a conversation. It wasn't just a conversation. Somebody's temper snapped. A shove became a fight, became something no apology could undo. Doc Turner died on a sidewalk 3 blocks from the garage he loved, 26 years old, a wedding ring on his finger, and a child not yet born. Caleb got the call at 2 a.m. He remembered every second of it. The hallway outside his mother's hospital room, the phone nearly slipping from his shaking hand, the sound of his own voice asking the question he already knew the answer to. At the funeral, Caleb stood beside Grace, 7 months pregnant, holding her husband's ring in a small velvet box because she couldn't bear to put it on yet. Caleb made her a promise that day, the kind of promise young men make when grief is louder than good judgment, but the kind he intended to keep with everything he had. "You and the baby are family now," he told her. "Whatever you need. Forever." That's the vow. For 2 years, he kept it. He helped with rent. He fixed the car Doc never got to finish restoring. He showed up for the baby's first birthday, brought a stuffed motorcycle toy that made Grace laugh through tears. Then the club changed. Growth is not always gentle. As the Iron Vow Riders became something real, a proper clubhouse, then 2, then a name people in 3 counties recognized and eventually respected, Caleb stepped fully into leadership. What had been 5 friends became 40 members, then more. Chapters, structure, responsibility that ate every hour of every day. He told himself the distance from Grace and her daughter was temporary. A rough stretch. He was building something that would honor Doc's memory, a club that helped people, that protected the vulnerable, that stood for exactly what Doc believed in. Surely that counted as keeping the promise, even from a distance. But distance has a way of becoming permanent if nobody fights it. Grace moved twice for work. The letters got shorter. Then they stopped. A part of Caleb, the part he was least proud of, wondered if grief simply made it too hard to keep looking at the man who lived while her husband didn't. He never asked her. That was its own kind of cowardice, and he knew it even then. Years turned into a decade. A decade turned into nearly 3. The club grew a legend around Preacher, a man who never broke his word, who showed up at 3 a.m. for anyone who called, who buried more friends than most men befriend in a lifetime, and never once hardened past feeling it. Nobody knew that the promise haunting him hardest wasn't one he'd broken through cruelty. It was the one he'd let slip through neglect. The quiet kind of failure. The kind that doesn't announce itself with a single bad decision, but with 1,000 small ones. A call not returned, a visit postponed, a year that became 5. He kept the ring on his hand the entire time. Partly as memory. Partly, if he was honest with himself in the rare moments he allowed it, as penance. Which brings us back to Route 9, and a waitress named Nora, and a ring on a silver chain that had just cracked open 28 years in under 10 seconds. Preacher didn't speak for a long moment. His men at the counter exchanged glances. Nobody had seen the boss look like this. Not shaken by danger. Shaken by memory. "Your mother's name," he finally said, though it wasn't really a question. "Is it Grace?" Nora's face went pale. The coffee pot trembled slightly in her hand. "How do you know my mother's name?" "Because I gave her that ring's twin," Preacher said, holding up his own hand, "at your father's funeral. Because your father was my best friend. And because I made your mother a promise I should have kept a hell of a lot better than I did." The diner had gone entirely silent now. Even the cook had stopped pretending not to listen. Nora set the coffee pot down with a shaking hand, gripping the edge of the booth like she needed it to stay upright. 25 years of half-answers from her mother suddenly had a shape. "She never told me his name," Nora whispered. She never told me anything about him, just that he died protecting someone, and that it broke something in the family we knew before I was even born. Preacher closed his eyes. 28 years of guilt arrived all at once, in a diner booth, delivered by a young woman with her father's steady eyes and her mother's ring. "Sit down," he said quietly. "I've got a story to tell you. And after that, I'm going to ask you to take me to your mother, if she'll have me." Over the next hour, in a booth that grew crowded with more feeling than furniture, Preacher told her everything. Not the sanitized version. All of it: the garage, the code, the ring, the night he wasn't there, the funeral, the promise, and the slow, cowardly erosion of that promise across years he could never get back. He told her about the club Doc had dreamed of, and how it existed now because 5 friends and a mechanic's stubborn belief that people should look out for each other had somehow become a real, working thing. Chapters that ran toy drives every December. Members who escorted domestic violence survivors to court so they didn't have to walk in alone. A scholarship fund, named quietly without much fanfare, the Turner Fund, for kids whose parent had died in service to somebody else. "Your father's name is on something good," Preacher said, even if I was too much of a coward to make sure his daughter knew it. Nora listened with her arms crossed, defenses rising and falling in waves. Anger came first, real anger, the kind a person's owed when a childhood is missing pieces nobody explained. Then something softer crept in behind it. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But curiosity. The specific ache of finally understanding a shape she'd only ever felt as an absence. "She's 20 minutes from here," Nora finally said. "She works nights at the hospital. I don't know if she'll want to see you." "That's fair," Preacher said. "But I've waited 28 years to find out. I can survive one more hour." The hospital parking lot at midnight was nearly empty. 17 motorcycles pulling in at once. Engines cut respectfully a block away. The last stretch walked in near silence. Still drew attention, the way anything that looks like trouble does until people notice it isn't. Grace Turner was 52 now, silver threading through dark hair, a nurse's badge clipped to scrubs that had seen 1,000 overnight shifts. She was locking her car when she saw them coming across the lot, a dozen leather vests, and in front, a gray-bearded man she hadn't laid eyes on in 28 years. She didn't run. She didn't cry, not at first. She just stood very still, keys in hand, staring at the past as it walked toward her in real time. "Caleb," she said. Just his name. Nothing else. "Grace." His voice cracked on the single syllable. "I know I don't have the right to just show up like this." "No," she agreed. "You don't." The silence that followed was its own kind of conversation, everything unspoken for nearly 3 decades pressing against the space between them. "I let you down," Preacher said finally. "Not once. Every year I didn't call, every visit I told myself I'd make and didn't. I built a whole club on the idea of never leaving anyone behind, and the first person I ever really failed was the one I promised the most to." Grace's eyes filled, but her chin stayed level. 28 years of raising a daughter alone had built a spine that didn't buckle easily. "Do you know what the hardest part was? It wasn't that you disappeared. It's that for a long time I understood why. Grief does that. It makes people run from each other instead of toward. I forgave you for that a long time ago, Caleb. What I never got over was that you never came back to find out. I'm here now," he said. 28 years too late. But I'm here." Nora stood a few feet back, watching her mother face a piece of history she'd never once described in detail. And in that moment, watching the man's hands tremble, hands that, by every account, had never trembled facing danger, Nora understood something about grief that no explanation could have taught her. It doesn't disappear. It waits. Sometimes for decades. Sometimes for a waitress's sleeve to ride up at the exact right moment, in front of the exact right man, in a diner that had no idea it was about to become the setting for the end of a 28-year silence. News like this doesn't stay quiet in a family like the Vow Riders. By the following weekend, what began as one man's overdue reckoning had become something the whole club leaned into. They didn't throw a party. Grief that old doesn't get resolved with balloons. Instead, they did what the club had always done best. They showed up quietly and consistently, in the specific ways that mattered. A crew of members with construction backgrounds spent 3 Saturdays repairing the porch on Grace's house, the one that had been sagging for years on a single income. Nobody made a speech about it. They just fixed what needed fixing, the way Doc would have. The Turner Scholarship Fund, which for years had quietly supported kids of fallen protectors without Nora ever knowing her own father was its namesake, formally invited her to join its small advisory board. Not as charity, as inheritance, a seat that had, in some sense, always belonged to her. And Preacher did something he'd never done in 28 years of leading the club. He told the full, unedited story at the club's annual Remembrance Ride, the ride they did every year for members lost, a tradition that had always honored Doc's memory in the abstract, without ever naming the cost of Caleb's own failure to the family left behind. "We build clubs like this to protect people," he told 40 riders gathered in a gravel lot at dawn. But protecting people isn't just about showing up when there's danger. Sometimes it's about not disappearing when there's just pain. I got that wrong for almost 3 decades. I'm telling you this so none of you make the same mistake with the people who are counting on you. It wasn't a perfect ending. Grief and guilt that old don't resolve into anything tidy. Grace and Caleb rebuilt something. Not what they'd lost, but something new, careful, slow. Nora, for her part, kept waitressing at the diner on Route 9 for another year. Though now, every few weeks, a line of motorcycles would pull into the gravel lot, and the man at the corner booth would ask for the coffee refill himself, just so he could sit a little longer with the daughter of the best friend he'd once failed to protect. There's a kind of promise most people never think about until it's tested. Not the dramatic kind, sworn in danger or crisis, but the quiet, ongoing kind. The promise to keep showing up. To not let time and distance quietly erode what a single, sincere moment once meant. Caleb Whitfield spent 28 years believing that building something good, a club, a legacy, a scholarship fund with someone else's name on it, was enough to make up for the people he'd stopped showing up for personally. It wasn't, not entirely. Good work and good intentions don't replace a phone call. But it also wasn't nothing. And when the moment finally came to make it right, what mattered wasn't that he'd never failed. Everyone fails somebody eventually, but that he was willing to stand in a hospital parking lot at midnight and say so, out loud, to the person he owed it to most. Nora got a mother's ring back on her wrist, a father's name finally spoken in full, and a community she never knew was quietly holding a place for her the whole time. Grace got an apology 28 years overdue, not enough to erase the silence, but enough to finally close it, and a club built on a mechanic's simple belief that people should look out for each other, got a living reminder of exactly why that belief mattered in the first place. Some promises take a lifetime to fully keep. The ones worth making are the ones you keep trying to, even that late.